South Africa battles COVID-19 and faces a series of challenges on several fronts, including the economy and jobs. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. South Africa has been hard hit by COVID. There are close to 1.5 million reported cases and more than 48,000 people have died. But there is some good news. On Wednesday, President Cyril Ramaphosa was among the first South Africans to receive the Johnson & Johnson vaccination as the country launched its vaccination program. The plan now is to vaccinate 40 million people. That's about two-thirds of the population. Meanwhile, the country is dealing with other serious challenges, including a reeling economy. President Ramaphosa outlined his major goals for the country in a recent State of the Nation address.
We must defeat the coronavirus pandemic. That is primary in everything that we have to do as a nation. And second, we must accelerate our economic recovery. Third, we must implement economic reforms to create sustainable jobs and drive inclusive growth. And finally, and not leaving many other things aside, but these are the key ones. And finally, we must fight corruption and strengthen the state that has been weakened.
We have a great panel assembled to discuss all of this. Joining me now via Skype from Cape Town is Vuyolwethu Zungula. He is president of the African Transformation Movement. With us from Cape Town too is Lawson Naidu. He is Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. Also joining us from Johannesburg via Skype is Nhlahla Sehume. He is a journalist and television anchor for Newsroom Africa. And with us too from Johannesburg is Gideon Chitanga. He is a political economist specializing in conflict and security research. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Nhlahla, let me start with you, and let's talk about the COVID crisis in South Africa. As I said, 1.5 million cases, almost 50,000 people have died in this pandemic. Then, of course, there was the setback with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was found to be ineffective against the South African variant. But, as I said, good news. Now you have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. What can you tell us about the mood in the country and how people are responding to this?
Yeah, well, South Africa's government has had a very hard time having to contend with the rising number of COVID-19 cases at almost 1.5 million. But it's good to note that the country currently records about a 93% recovery rate, which is on a bit of a positive side. And more good news, South Africa launched its COVID-19 vaccination drive today, battling to tame a more infectious variant of this coronavirus with a rollout of the Johnson & Johnson shot for the first time outside major clinical trials. Now, the president received the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus disease vaccination at the Khayelitsha Hospital near Cape Town today. Now, you would know that South Africa has recorded almost half of the COVID-19 deaths and over a third of confirmed infections in all of Africa, but has lagged wealthier Western nations in launching its immunization campaign.
Vuyolwethu Zungula, you've been critical of the vaccination rollout in South Africa, but it seems the government is slowly coming to grips with the situation right now. It plans, as I said, on vaccinating up to 40 million South Africans with this vaccine. What is your view on what is happening in the country right now?
Well, what is the issue from our side when it comes to the vaccine was the vaccine was not, they did not give tangible proof that the vaccine was tested and it was safe to be used by the citizens. And we're happy that the government did concede that the previous vaccine was not up to standard. Hence, we are now using the Johnson & Johnson. However, our concern with Johnson & Johnson is the admission that this is basically for test or for study purposes. It's a good thing to have a vaccine to ensure that we defeat COVID-19. However, it would be reckless and irresponsible for us not to scrutinize on the safety of the vaccine and our institutions testing the vaccine if it's going to do its intended work.
There have been tests, that have been carried out on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine outside of South Africa. It has been found to be effective. Not as effective as some of the other vaccines, but it does provide some protection.
Even if that is the case, remember, South Africa has got its own scientists, and our scientists need to ensure that they do what they are constitutionally mandated to do to make sure that the vaccine is safe for our people. It can't be that we take the word of scientists outside of the country, whereas we've got institutions in our country whose sole mandate it is to test each and every medicine that comes to our country and give a stamp of approval before dispatching to the people. The last thing we want, it is any form of death, because that will lead to people distrusting the vaccines even more, and ultimately we won't be able to achieve the target of vaccinating more than 40 million citizens.
All right, fair point. Lawson Naidu, President Ramaphosa has been talking about COVID-19. He's also been talking about the vaccination program. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The success of the vaccination program will rely on active collaboration between all sectors of society. We are greatly encouraged by the active involvement of business, labor, health, industry players, as well as medical aid schemes.
So I should say, Lawson, that he made those comments before the rollout of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but he's very positive, very upbeat. What is your assessment of the situation in South Africa?
Thank you. Let me start by saying I don't think there is any issue with the safety of the vaccines that are being used in South Africa, or indeed being used around the world. Both the AstraZeneca and the J&J vaccine underwent clinical trials in South Africa. The only issue with the AstraZeneca vaccine was that it was found not to be effective on the new variant that we are currently facing in South Africa, and that's the reason it was withdrawn. So yes, there's been a significant challenge to government, because we appear to have begun the negotiations with global pharmaceutical companies quite late compared to many other countries, not just in the West, but countries in the developing world as well. And we are playing a little bit of catch-up here, and so the president is under pressure. It's certainly a great start that we've begun the rollout of the vaccination program today. But what we still lack is a clear plan of how the 40 million South Africans that need to be vaccinated in order to achieve population immunity is going to be done, and over what period, and what mix of vaccines are we going to be able to acquire in order to achieve those targets.
And that, I would imagine, Lawson, is very dependent on South Africa's access to vaccines.
It is indeed dependent on that. So we know that, in addition to the 80,000 Johnson & Johnson vaccines that have arrived last night, there's a further 500,000 of those vaccines expected over the next few weeks, that there are 20 million Pfizer vaccines that are due to begin coming in from next month as well as an additional 12 million vaccines that we've procured through the global COVAX facility. The problem is that there is no firm time frame for any of these. But on the positive side, there have been significant collaboration between government and the private sector, as the president announced in that clip you just played, between the private sector, between the business community, and the private medical scheme in South Africa, which is substantial in that it covers 7 million people, and medical aid schemes have agreed to become part of this, and the private sector is going to play a role in the rollout of the vaccination program, because government will not be able to achieve that on its own.
Gideon Chitanga, of course, the pandemic has also hit South Africa's economy. South Africa is not unique in that situation. This virus has hit economies around the world. But in South Africa, there could be a budget deficit of 15% at the end of March. What are the biggest concerns as far as the economy is concerned? And how are people and businesses coping with this?
I think the biggest concern in the short term, it is to make sure that South Africa opens its economy, industry start to function from an optimal level to a maximum level where they can get to. The other thing is that President Ramaphosa came into power on the back of a promise or expectations that he will reboot the economy from a decline under the former President Jacob Zuma. And it seems to me that the COVID-19 situation is worsened a situation, and the economy is not restarted as had been expected. So we already know that from the statement that was given last week by the Reserve Bank, that unemployment has increased from 20% to 30.1%. There's a huge population of young people who are in need of jobs. The cost of living has increased. People in the informal areas are hard hit because there is an increasing population in South Africa that is relying on the informal economy. So I think there is, and also the fact that South Africa is a very unequal society, which is already suffering from heavy historical, structural, economic aspects that already require comprehensive strategies to address them. And these issues have perpetually been problematic because the country still continues to stagger in the dark in terms of coming up with means to uplift the lives of the majority, particularly of black people who are continuously left behind. So as it is, I think that I understand that in the SONA, President Ramaphosa passively refers to the economic reconstruction plan, or the government plan to reconstruct the economy, focusing on quite a number of things: infrastructure, social safety nets to cover livelihoods, stimulus to increase or create opportunities for employment. But my problem with all the promises that have been given by the president or the current government is that they are great on paper. They are located at different levels of planning and key government institutions. But when you look at the country on the ground, you don't witness any takeoff or any immediate impact. And at the present moment, the country cannot continue in this trajectory. People on the ground need immediate jobs, particularly at the base of the population, where a lot of young people do not have jobs, do not have means to survive, and a lot of generally mostly poor households are reeling under the pressure of COVID.
Okay, in Ntlatlisiwe, what is your view on that? We have heard President Ramaphosa talk about his plans for the economy. He's talking about revamping ports, infrastructure issues, dealing with the energy issue, improving transport and telecoms as well. But as Gideon just told us, big on promises, short on delivery. Are people going to buy it this time?
And I'd like to add one more aspect, big on promises, but lacks on detail. I mean, the president has tried to provide hope that the country's economic recovery plan is on par, as he outlined several achievements. Now, this was during his State of the Nation address. He acknowledged that the country's outlook seemed bleak as the economy shrunk by 6% in the third quarter of 2020. A total of about 1.7 million people were jobless in the third quarter of 2020, and the unemployment rate was at 30.8%.
Violetu Zungula, I mean, as we hear, South Africa faces many challenges there. President Ramaphosa faces many challenges, but to be fair to him, he inherited a very battered and mismanaged economy from his predecessor, Jacob Zuma, who is in fact now being investigated for some astounding levels of corruption in the country. And as Gideon pointed out, there is also the historical structural problems in South Africa that were brought about by the apartheid system. Let's listen to the president again.
We must overcome poverty, hunger, joblessness, and the inequality in our country. We must overcome a legacy of exclusion and dispossession that continues to impoverish our people.
So, Violetu, what will it take to get South Africa's economy back on track?
I think the first thing to note is that this projection that Mr. Ramaphosa inherited, a bad economy, seeks to paint him as someone who was not part of the previous administration. He was a deputy president since 2014, and he took over as president from 2018. Therefore, he's been part and parcel of everything that has happened since 2014. Therefore, he needs to take a bit of responsibility. One thing that South Africa needs now, it is leadership that is able to take responsibility, not leadership that will seek to blame each and every other person besides itself. What South Africa needs is what President Ramaphosa spoke about, which is the localization drive, because if you look at the nature of our unemployment, more than 55% of the people unemployed in our country do not even have matric. Therefore, it is the entry-level jobs, the informal economy, that will get as many people as economically active as possible. Therefore, with that localization drive, that will get people economically active and change things around. Because one thing that the people of our country has always been complaining about is that it is one thing to say the economy is growing, but it does not, they do not feel it. The economy grows, but the jobs are not there, and it does not have a positive impact on them.
Okay. Lawson Naidu, President Ramaphosa did talk about the question of corruption in his State of the Union address, but it seems he's getting pressure from two sides. On the one hand, he's head of state, he's president of South Africa. On the other, he's also a key member, a leading member of the ruling party, the African National Congress. There seems to be interests within the party that do not want him to succeed in rooting out corruption. He's promising a new dawn. How big is a challenge is it for him?
Well, corruption is a massive challenge in South Africa, and it has been for some time now. Also, on the positive side, President Ramaphosa, since he came into power 3 years ago, has instituted significant changes in the law enforcement agencies, in particular the anti-corruption agencies, the National Prosecuting Authority, and the like. And we've begun to see the benefit of some of that, with some arrests being announced, a lot of money being recouped from dodgy tenders and the like, including a massive scandal that we had last year where funds were being diverted from PPE procurement by politically connected individuals and so on. But the significant issue that the president faces, and the real political challenge for him, is that senior members of his own party, including the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Mr. Ace Magashule, are facing fraud and corruption charges. In fact, Mr. Magashule will be in court again this Friday to face those charges. Jacob Zuma, the former president, is due in court next week to face similar fraud and corruption charges relating to the arms deal from the late 1990s. So there are a number of senior members of the ANC who are facing these criminal charges, and therefore there is resistance from within the ANC for these people to step aside from the positions they hold, both in government as well as in the political party. Yeah. Because they fear for their livelihoods, and that's the challenge the president is facing. To his credit, though, is that he's leaving it to the law enforcement agencies to deal with these matters and not intervening politically, as it would be incorrect for him to do that.
Right, Lawson, would it be fair to say that there is a split in the ANC? There are those who support the president and what he's trying to do, and there are those who are actually actively working against that.
Oh, it's easy to say that, because we see those contradictions playing out very much in public, with leading members of the ANC being openly critical of the president, undermining the efforts that the president is making, whether it be on the anti-corruption front, on the economic front, or even dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. So there are attempts, certainly from factions within the ANC, to undermine the president. But I believe that the president is still firmly in control of the party, and he's going to continue to face these snipers from the sidelines, who are often joined by members of opposition political parties in trying to undermine Mr. Ramaphosa. So it adds to the to the crisis that he faces, and the difficulties that he faces in moving the country forward, because to a large extent he's being held back by his own political party.
Gideon Chitanga, a South African economist and political scientist, William Gumede, said 2 years ago that the reason that South Africa its economy was failing was because he blamed it totally on corruption. Now the country has set up a commission. It's called the Zondo Commission, named for the chairman of the commission, who is a judge in the country. He's looking into corruption in the country, which is also referred to in South Africa as state capture. Recently, over the past few days, we've just seen President Zuma was subpoenaed to appear before that commission. He didn't turn up. It was seen as a major snub to the commission and a possible violation of South African law. How is that being seen in the country?
I think there is a level of concern that is very critical to the position that President Zuma has taken, because it creates a bad impression for South Africa's constitutional democracy. But I would like to understand corruption as a major societal problem, and I think that at this present juncture, it is important to acknowledge the efforts that the current government is doing, part of which is reflected in the work of the Zondo Commission, part of which is reflected in the efforts of President Ramaphosa to clean government institutions, particularly the justice delivery system, and to make sure that institutions of justice are autonomous from political pressure, as witnessed during the reign of former President Zuma, in terms of determining cases and executing justice based on the law and not necessarily on politics. And the reason why I am actually highlighting these facts is that when you are dealing with a lot of African countries, it feels to me like a tendency to easily point at corruption as the major problem which affects economic development. I think that there are things outside corruption. Of course, corruption is a major problem, but I think that there are issues outside corruption. And I think when I look at the South African economy and its politics, I can't stop thinking about other countries in the SADC which exited colonial domination based on the same kind of political settlement. And I think that the most important thing for South Africa is to start to imagine a long-term strategy beyond COVID, which only we started to witness last year, to start to think about medium to long-term solutions in terms of growing the economy beyond the limitations of its colonial capitalist model to a broad-based economy that is planned to be more inclusive and including the totality of its population. The other dilemma is dealing with, so there are reports in analysts have pointed out that one of the fights that you see in the ANC is mainly about the control of the economy, in the sense of those who had vested interests since apartheid, and they've continued to control the economy, do not want to let go of their control of the economy, and those who also want to come in feel that they are excluded. This exclusion is playing out, implicating private sector, the ANC, factions, and other players in the private sector. And I think this is a genuine concern. And I think there's need for a solution which allows pluralist participation in the economy, particularly within the government, which is the main source of business in South Africa.
In Tlhatla, even before the pandemic, South Africa had very high levels of unemployment. Its unemployment rate is among the worst in the world. President Ramaphosa is talking about these very ambitious infrastructure programs. We talked about them, revamping the country's ports, revamping the transport sector, telecoms, things like that. Question is, does the country have the money for this? And is there the political will to implement these programs?
Well, the president said the economic relief package that he introduced last year, valued at about 500 billion rand, had provided much relief to poor households and struggling businesses. He said about 18 million people received additional grant payments and about 57 billion rand to 4.5 million workers who were paid in wage support as part of the UIF's TERS scheme, which is a temporary employment relief scheme meant to ease the knock-on effect of this COVID-19 pandemic and the impact it's had on people's income. And more importantly, people who are unemployed in the country, young people, have been receiving about 350 rand per month, and that scheme has had to be extended as well. But it still said that the economic effects of COVID-19 are still going to be felt going into the future. And it seems like the unemployment rate is also not, the numbers are quite staggering if you look at it. South Africa currently holding an unemployment rate of some 30.2%.
These problems are not new to South Africa. The country has had a very high unemployment rate for quite some time right now. Its economy has been struggling for quite some time right now. Given these serious political problems that the country faces, why have political parties, opposition political parties in South Africa, not been able to capitalize on this at the ballot box? The ANC still has a firm grip at the ballot box.
The ANC has got a firm grip on the voters because of the historical fight of defeating apartheid. Secondly, there are also the interventions, which is your RDP houses, the social grants that they've provided. Therefore, to a majority of poor and underprivileged people, they seem to think that all of those interventions are coming from ANC, the organization, instead of government. Therefore, hence you find that opposition parties are having it very difficult to win over the support of people, particularly from the low income and poor communities, because of that loyalty to the ANC.
Lawson, I have one other question about the pandemic, and this is something that the President has been talking about as well. South Africa, as we have seen, has faced challenges getting access to the vaccines, but President Ramaphosa has also criticized developed countries, which he's accused of hoarding vaccines, developing countries not getting the same kind of access as rich developed countries. How can South Africa overcome that?
Well, this has been a problem because, one of the main problems that the world as a whole faces is a shortage of the supply of vaccines, and because the wealthier Western countries have bought up in advance significant supplies of the vaccine, there's less to go around for developing countries, and who, because they were not able to participate in the research and development phase of these vaccines, are now having to pay a higher price than Western countries for those vaccines. So those are some of the global inequalities that we're seeing that are making it more and more difficult for countries to access the vaccine, even if they are available. So I think it was that level of frustration that was being expressed by President Ramaphosa. And I think having done so, and the negotiations now that are the bilateral negotiations with the major pharmaceutical manufacturers of vaccines has opened the doors, and we're beginning to see some shift in that. But it is a problem, and it's not just about access to vaccines in South Africa, because I think the President was articulating a frustration that many countries in the developing world are suffering at the moment at the hands of these large multinational pharmaceutical companies.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And we need to leave it there. Thanks for joining us on another edition of The Heat.